Hi class, welcome to lesson number 12 in the Continuing Stephen Academy's course prep on AP Micro and Macroeconomics. So far we've gone over the fundamentals of micro and macroeconomics, and then we're covering the microeconomic part of it, and then later on we'll move on to macroeconomics. So continuing this lesson, number 12 on microeconomics, I believe last time I asked you a question. The homework question was regarding CPED, which stands for cross price elasticity of demand, and I tried to ask you guys what is it really and try to explain to me the formula as well. So the answer to that is pretty simple. Cross price elasticity of demand, as I said before, talks about how the price of another substitute good, right? So say you are making, I don't know, maybe you're making a car like Honda, right? So if you have a substitute good like, say, a Toyota, right, and the price of a Toyota decreases, the CPED, or cross price elasticity of demand, questions how does the demand for your good changes if a substitute good's price change? Does that make sense? So one of the ways to, first of all, kind of get this down is through the formula, right? So CPED, as we discussed before, CPED, let me make sure I get this out of here, okay? So CPED, the way cross price elasticity of demand, right, as I said before, is equivalent to the percent change, right, in the quantity demanded, and I always say QD for quantity demanded, right, of product Y, right? So say this is your product, right? This is your product. Product Y is going to be your product over, right, the percent change in, I hope you guys remember this, is the percent change in the price of your substitute product. Let's call it product X, okay? So this is how we explained it last time, and this is exactly what cross price elasticity of demand is. So if someone asks you a question saying, okay, can you calculate the cross price elasticity of demand, and they give you data on two particular products, Y and X, using these formulas over here, we can try to solve the cross price elasticity. And it's extremely important in kind of analyzing how you price your products and how the pricing of your substitute product can affect your product, right? So it's really helpful in business to think about this kind of stuff. So that being said, let's move on to the new and exciting stuff for today. I think before I get out of elasticity, I want to discuss that one last topic, which is the determinants of price elasticity. So really speaking, the determinants of price elasticity of demand, there are three main ones, and we're going to go over them. So let's, that being said, let's start off. Okay, so this is going to be, topic is determinants of price elasticity. That's that word again we talked about in detail last time. Elasticity of demand. Okay? All right. Determinants of cross elasticity. And I said there are three main ones, right? So let's start off with the first one. What is the first one? What's the first determinant for the price elasticity of demand? First one is time, right? And what do I mean by time? Let me explain to you guys. Let me write it down. The reason why we discuss time is the price elasticity of demand really varies based on, are you talking about short run or long run, right? So it's always a question of short run versus long run. Okay? Now, why is elasticity different between short run and long run? Okay, and I believe I hit this a little bit in the last lesson. If not, I'm sorry, but one of the things we talked about is the fact that during short run, typically speaking, your price elasticity of demand is a little less elastic than the long run. The reason being is, imagine in the early 20th century, when cars were just about to pick up, right? So imagine the first few people who came up with it, Benz or Ford, right? Imagine you take a car like Model T, right? One of the earliest Ford cars out there. you'd imagine for a first kind of car out there, there are not many substitute products, right? So what happens is your elasticity in the short run, right? This is like when the Model T, for example, when the first cars just came out, right? You would have a kind of more inelastic kind of demand. I'll tell you the reason why, right? And remember, always label price and quantity. We talked about, okay, so this is our demand. We said that, well, this will be completely elastic. This will be completely inelastic. So, say the demand is something more like this, right? In the short run, right? The short run. The reason being that in Model T, right, and of course it was really successful as a car because it was actually pretty valuable and I mean a pretty valued price. But what we're trying to say is if there are not many substitute products in the short run, what you could do is if you change your price up a little bit, your demand is not going to change by that much because there's not that many substitute products, right? But in the long run, if you look at today, imagine how many different kind of car manufacturers there are, right? There's tons of car brands. I'm sure you guys can name off a lot. And that's why in the long run, typically speaking, right, in the long run, they tend to be a little more elastic, right? Demand tends to be, I'll put that with a capital D this time, right? Demand tends to be a little more elastic in the long run, okay? And I need to always label my axes. But so in the short run and the long run, price elasticity of demand tends to be a little more inelastic, and in the long run it tends to be more elastic because as you go on in the future, right, as time progresses, in any market, if there's a lot of profit available, what tends to happen is that people will come into that market and try to take a bite out of that profit, right? So, and what happens is as more competitors are hopping into that market, it becomes more elastic because there's more substitute products available, and consumers, right, if you change a price up a little bit, can switch to another product that's maybe a little cheaper, okay? So, imagine this is like early when the car first came out, and this is today when there are a lot of different cars, right? So that's why today in the car market, prices are very kind of, they're very important because that could make a difference in buying and deciding a car for a consumer. So the first one we talked about, is time, okay? So what is the second one? All right, so, we talked about difference between short run and long run. Let's try to think. Okay, well, one of the first ones we can probably think about is, apart from time, we can think about the fact that what else could be important? Well, we could say, well, we talked about substitute products. Well, let's talk about the other part as a consumer. What's more important, right? Income, right? Income is really important because the amount of money you make really dictates what kind of products you can buy, right? So proportion of income to your budget is really important. To budget, right? And the way we write this is in a formula, right? Is the cost of product X, right? Your product X could be anything. Could be a pencil, could be a car, right? Could be anything. Cost of product X divided by your, I'm pretty sure you can guess, is your total budget or total car, right? Or excuse me, total income, right? So why is this important in deciding the elasticity of demand? Well, the thing is that based on your total budget, right, you can afford product X or not. So say, take a thing like diamonds, right? Diamonds are extremely expensive, okay? And so the cost of product X will be very high compared in relation to your budget. But take a thing like, let's take maybe an example like what's pencils, right? Pencils are relatively cheap. So compared to your budget, pencils are going to be taking a smaller portion. Now the argument goes that the higher, right, this ratio is, the higher the cost, right, it's going to be more inelastic. I'll tell you why. Say De Beers, the entire company that controls a majority of the diamonds market, decides that they're going to bump up the diamonds cost by, I don't know, about 10 to 15%, right? The reason why it's going to be inelastic is if they change the price of diamonds, which is already expensive, to being a little more expensive, it's not going to change much of the demand, right? But imagine if I change something like pencils, right? And again, this comes back to that substitute good, right? So if I'm making pencils and all of a sudden I increase the price of pencils by 15%, you as a consumer will be like, why should I pay you extra? Because I can get so many other companies that that make pencils, right? And I don't have to pay that 15% increase. Does that make sense? So the more number of substitute products we said before, the more elastic things are. And that's why the cost of product X to the budget is important in deciding, how your elasticity of demand is going to play out. Okay? So lastly, this is all connected. But the third one, I'm not going to erase this one. I'm just going to kind of section it off and write number 3 here, right? The last one we're going to talk about is the competitive structure of the market, right? So write that down. Competitive. You know what? I changed my mind. I'm gonna actually erase this so that we have enough space to write down. Hopefully you guys got the formula down. It's pretty simple for the number 2, but I'm gonna go ahead and erase this, okay? And we're gonna talk about number 3. Okay. All right. So what's the last one? Number 3 says, what is the competitive structure of the market? Now, before I write it down, I want to discuss why this is important. We've discussed this in number 1 and number 2, right? We said that the higher the competition that we have, right, the more substitute products there are, and the more elastic that demand becomes, right? Why? Because the more competition there is, the more substitute goods there are, and you can't change your prices as much, because if you as a manufacturer start to charge a little more, people are going to switch to other manufacturers that offer their product for cheaper. But if you don't have substitute products and you increase your price, then what are they going to do? They're not going to go anywhere else. If they want diamonds, they're going to still come to De Beers, right? So that being said, let me write it down this time, right? So what's the competitive structure? Competitive structure of the market, right? Of market. And I believe there's another part to it, and it says consumer choices, okay? And consumer choice is also very important, and we'll explain to you why. Consumer, this word's good, choices, okay? So why are consumer choices important? Well, think about it this way, okay? If it's a necessity, right? If something like food, right, which is very, very necessary because we need to literally survive, okay, to eat, otherwise we can't survive, right? At least the most of us, right? So the reason being is that if there's a thing like food, generally the argument goes that if it's a necessity, right, generally speaking, now there's 2 conditions, right? Are there substitute goods or are they not? I'll give you a reason. Say you need something, right? Let's take water, okay? And I am the only person in the world that makes water, okay? I can charge whatever I want, okay? Because there's going to be no competitor and you need it, right? So I can charge anything I want. But say I make water, but there are 50,000 other people who make, bottled water. If I increase my price, well, you're going to go ahead and switch over to that other person because they're cheaper, right? So really, consumer choices and preferences are also very important in creating the substitute products. But really, at the heart of elasticity of demand, you have to understand that the more substitute goods there are, the more elastic that demand is. I'm going to say that one more time because it's really important. The more substitute goods there are, the more elastic a demand is, okay? And so this one, competitive structure market, discusses the number of substitute goods, okay? And then as I said before, the higher the number of substitute goods, okay, the more elastic something is. more elastic. Okay? So these are the three things that basically determine the price elasticity of demand, right? So number one was the, what was number one? Number one was the time, right? Was it short run or long run? Number two was what's the proportion of the income, right, to the good that you're buying, right? What's the cost of the good and what's the budget that you have? Number three, finally, is the structure of the market and the consumer choices and preferences. These three together dictate the price elasticity of demand. Okay? I hope this is clear to you guys. I think the most important thing out of all of this is understanding the higher the number of substitute goods, the more elastic the demand is. I think this is very important, understanding price elasticity of demand. Everything else kind of falls in place. All right? So that being said, let's go ahead and move on to another topic. All right, so since we've covered, I feel like we've covered most of elasticity, the next topic we're going to talk about is, in my opinion, very important because as a student learning economics, I think it's really important to think about you're a consumer and how does that affect me and how can I use economics to make better decisions. And so the topic today we're going to talk about is consumer choice. Okay, consumer choice is very interesting because you as a consumer get to use economics and economic models to explain why you do certain things. Let me give you an example. Okay, so say today that you go out and you decide to buy, I don't know, ice cream, right? Ice cream, I don't care if it's a van, I don't care if it's a store, you're going out and buying ice cream, okay? Now, you really are craving ice cream, okay? So you really want chocolate ice cream, okay? And I've been making all of you salivate, okay? Because chocolate ice cream is delicious. But anyways, you guys want to go out and get chocolate ice cream. The thing is that in economics, we discuss this term, right? And it's to you guys in layman terms, it's happiness, right? The reason why you're going and buying that ice cream is because of happiness, okay? Because you'll become happy, right? Or you'll be satisfied, right? Once you have that ice cream, okay? Or it could be anything. It could be pizza, it could be any food, whatever, right? The point is you take a decision to make yourself happy, okay? So let's start with that, right? Pretty easy concept to understand happiness, okay? So this is going to be under the giant umbrella called consumer choice, all right? So let me write that down real quick. And the reason why I'm talking about all this is because this is going to tie into a concept called utility, which is also extremely important for economics, okay? So this is a giant umbrella, and it comes under consumer choice, okay? All right. So we said that whatever you do and whatever decision you take, it's because you want to be happy or satisfied, correct? So being happy / satisfied. Okay? And being economists, we kind of love terms, okay? And the way we define happiness, okay, or being satisfied or satisfaction, right, is this term called utility. Okay? And utility is really important, okay? And I'll explain why. Because when you go out and get that ice cream, right, as an economist, right, we want to understand how much, right, we're trying to quantify how much of utility you're getting, right? It's extremely important because if we can quantify the happiness or the utility that you get from us, from eating that ice cream, right, we can tell you how much ice cream you're going to consume, right, and how much before you're going to go, ugh, like I've had 5 ice creams and I kind of feel bad, okay? So utility is extremely important because it quantifies happiness or satisfaction. And these are absolutely, utility is absolutely given by each consumer because each individual, you as one person might say, okay, I love 2 to 3 ice creams and I'm done. Another person might say, no, man, I'm just 1 ice cream, I'm done. So utility really differs from person to person. So tastes and preferences are really important when it comes to economics because tastes and preferences of each individual is what dictates utility. Okay? So utility is extremely important, right? So under consumer choice, there's this fancy thing called the theory of consumer choice, and there are about 5 different ones, and we're going to go over each one, right? So under the theory of consumer choice, and we're just going to call it a giant bucket of, say consumer choice, right? The first part is the consumer rationale, okay? So first part of consumer choice is the consumer rationale, and I'll tell you what that is, right? Consumer rationale. What is the consumer rationale? Well, as I was discussing a little bit before this, the reason why consumer rationale is so important is because a consumer like yourself takes the decision of going and eating ice cream because you feel that it's rational that you're going to be happy or you're going to get utility from the fact that you're going to consume this product, right? The reason why satisfaction is really important because it's going to dictate how much money you spend or how much you expend, right? It's going to dictate how much you spend or expend, you spend on goods and services, right? Goods are ice cream, food, toys, PlayStation, TVs, could be anything, right? And then services are, why does, services could be anything. Teaching could be, why am I coming here and teaching today, right? Or it could be someone, being a police officer, right? All those come under services, and then goods obviously are, you guys know this, they're just, tangible products. So consumer rationale dictates how much you spend or expend on a particular product or good service rather, because this kind of comes back to the utility. You're spending on goods and services because you want some utility. You get some amount of utility or happiness from spending money, okay? Or whatever it is that you're trying to get this product, okay? So consumer rationale is really important in consumer choice because it's kind of intuitive in saying this, but you have to think about it, okay? So what's number 2, okay? Number 2 talks about the ranks, right? It says that a consumer, we're going to leave that word alone because it's really important, right? And this will be number 2, okay? Number 2 says that a consumer, right, can rank goods and services, right, in order of preferences, right? Consumer can rank goods and services in order of preferences. Why is this important? Okay, so why is this really important? Well, the reason why we can say this assumption is important is because you as a consumer, right? If you say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go and spend X amount of money on education, and then I'm going to spend X amount of money on pizza, X amount of money on a TV, right? But your friend might spend a different amount. He might spend Y amount of money on education, Y amount of money on pizza, and Y amount of money on TV. You guys have different priorities. You might prioritize education, right, in front of your friend, right? And your friend might prioritize TV, right, more importantly than education maybe. I know this is kind of a skewed example, but my point is that as economists, we believe that consumers rank their order of preferences. Now, why is this important? The reason why it's so important is because when we come down and we say, okay, well, you know what, we're going to tell you how much you probably are going to consume based on, maximizing your utility. The most amount of happiness you can get is the fact that we can say on paper that, okay, you as a person prefer education as one, okay? That's number one bucket, okay? Or 2 is TV, right? So based on this, we can tell you, okay, he's going to be most happy with education. He's going to be most happy, next happy with TV, right? So really speaking, when we quantify, again, this is going to come down to quantifying utility because, you know, we go crazy with utility. But the reason why this assumption is so important is because we understand that you as a consumer can rank these preferences, okay? So this is number 2, okay? And there's actually 5 in all of this, and we're gonna cover 3, and then I'll give you a little problem for homework, and then we'll come back with 4 and 5 in the next lesson. But I think the main takeaway from this lesson is really understanding the importance of utility, right? We're quantifying happiness or satisfaction, and it's extremely important for you guys to understand that. All right, let's go with number 3, okay? So what is number 3? So we said 1 was the fact that consumers rationale, right? They do things, they spend money because they get some utility, some happiness from products or goods and services. 2 is they can rank preferences. So what's 3? 3 is, and this is probably one of the most important things in my opinion, is that consumers, right, understand diminishing, and these are a couple important words, diminishing, oops, sorry about that, diminishing marginal utility. Okay, I'm putting an exclamation mark because this is extremely, extremely important. Okay, now what do we mean by this? All right, there's a couple terms that we don't know. Now we've seen this term before. We said utility is happiness, right, or satisfaction. We've seen this word too before, right? Remember this word marginal, right? Marginal, I'm gonna walk over here and try to explain to you guys what marginal is. Marginal, right, is the additional benefit that you get, right? So we said this word, right? We said marginal. Okay, remember when we went over marginal analysis, we talked about marginal cost, marginal benefit, right? So marginal just means additional, right? Or rather, the extra 1 unit, right? What happens for the extra 1 unit, right? Plus 1. What happens if I add 1 unit, right? So walking back over here, right? When we said diminishing marginal utility, by marginal utility, we're saying how much utility is added after we add a unit. Does that make sense? So how much happiness or satisfaction do we get when we add 1 unit, right? 1 unit. Right? Whatever that is. That could be 1 extra ice cream. That could be 1 extra slice of pizza. Could be 1 extra lesson of tennis that you want to learn. 1 extra class. Whatever it is, marginal utility talks about how much utility you get by adding that 1 extra unit. Okay? Diminishing is a concept that says that it's same thing as saying decreasing, right? Decreasing. So we're saying that consumers understand the fact that when you graph marginal utility, which is a utility that you add, right? MU is marginal utility. It kind of somewhat looks like a downward sloping graph, right? Because we're saying that, okay, you know what? When you eat an ice cream, right? It's amazing, right? The first unit, you go from 0, right, all the way up. It's like you skyrocket. You get a lot of happiness by eating that first ice cream. The second ice cream, you know, it's really good. You're still getting positive utility. You're still positive happiness. But is it really better than the first one? Probably not. By the 4th one, though, or the 5th one, now you're like, oh, too much ice cream, right? So the concept is as you add utility, as you add units, right? As you're adding more units, your marginal utility is going to decrease because you're never going to get as much happiness as you did with the first unit. And this is the concept of diminishing marginal utility. And we're going to come back to this particular point in the next lesson, because I want to give you guys problems to make sure that we understand this mathematically speaking. But, so we went over 1, 2, and 3, right? We went 1 over the fact that consumers' rationale. We talked a little about that. 2 is the consumer's preferences, and 3 is this fact that diminishing marginal utility, which is a phenomenon in economics. So marginal utility is always decreasing. So that being said, we're going to come back to the next, lesson and talk about number 4 and 5, and we're going to mathematically explain why this point happens and try to find out how you decide what you want to eat or what you want to see or whatever you want to do using mathematics and, quantifying this utility that we talked about a little bit before. Before I let you guys go, here's my homework question for you guys, right? This is pretty standard. I like when I give you homework questions, I want to see that you understand what I've taught you, okay? So explain me the 3 determinants of price elasticity of demand. So this is not about consumer choice. This is about the first topic we covered in this class. Explain me the 3 determinants that determine the price elasticity of demand. I'll say that one more time. Tell me the 3 determinants of the price elasticity of demand. Okay? That's the homework question. We'll come back with the answer in the next lesson. Hope to see you guys. We'll continue microeconomics. Hopefully knock this out of the park. And I'll see you guys in the next lesson. All right? Thank you so much for joining me for this one.